Thank you very much, Prof. Farid. I think it's a very interesting forum, and I believe there are many questions to be asked. I would invite at least 3 of you first to come forward and introduce yourself and direct your questions to the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato, and my esteemed members of the panel. I'm Dr. Ghazali, the one you mentioned from IDB. I purposely came today because through my good friend, Dr. Amran, to attend, and I'm overdressed because I'm from a wedding. I can't change. I can't change because the time was too short to look be normal like you all right? I had from the script was, what's wrong with Islam? I said, oh my God, when Islam was wrong? Because I bring a stack of books for you to read, then you know what's the problem with us. But now you see, now, Alhamdulillah, I can talk with you all. Now, let me go back, ladies and gentlemen, to my professor. I'm hearing what you are saying about modernity, post-modernity, and how we want to live with modernity. I mean, I beg to differ because I study in America too. Because I think you are coming from a philosophical underpinning of that the world is linear. If you read today, the Davos 2018, and you refer to 2015, the German Foreign Minister said to the world, we have 3 sacrosanct ideas of the West under threat. What are they? That's the result of the 17th century colonialism, which Farid was talking about. 1, the idea of progress. 2nd, free market capitalism. And 3rd, the nation state. Ladies and gentlemen, today all of them are gone. To the very idea coming from your side. I challenge all of you today because globalization dismissed everything. When we got 1957, the Constitution, for those who know not history, multiculturalism was the in thing. In 1985, Mr. Blair, as Prime Minister of UK, he reintroduced uniculturalism. And therefore, you see the jihad problem. It cannot fit into the system. So I want to bring you a bigger issue that when we discuss what is wrong with Islam or any other factor, you must have the historical context. It's very important how it comes. Because I would bet to you in the last 300 years, the rise of why the Muslim land became what it is today, because obvious one major factor, that anything that is Islam must be eradicated or denied. I mean, this is history. I'm not saying about that. You can read all these books around that. At this particular moment, the Muslim world has completely lost the legacy of Islam has a worldview. Let me repeat the word, worldview. It is it is a continuum of civilization because it brought 7 civilizations that came with it. So today Muslims are suffering from their own misdoing and exogenous factors. So I think for Malaysia in particular, my point to Dr. Kenney, it is not, by the way, I worked in Saudi Arabia for 13.5 years in the Islamic Development Bank. And we recognize the problems of the Ummah. 8 such challenges we have to solve. Own misdoing, external factors, history, and political leadership that is today, with respect, we have a major problem. My point is that in all your deliberation, the Muslims are in this room, they must go for a re-education. The Islamic education today must change thoroughly. For all of us here in today, even in the West, the modern man of the Ottoman is an example I like to quote to you. Professor Farid will remember. In the Ottoman, a grand imam of the mosque must have these qualifications. You'll be surprised how modern they are. First, they must know all the 3 religions of Abraham. Biblical studies, Islam, and Christianity. Must know, that is a mandatory note. Second, languages of the time, Persian, Latin, Greek, Arabic. Third, science and mathematics must be known. Fourth, communication. And fifth, would you believe it? They must be fantastically good-looking gentlemen. That means how to command. So my point to you, sir, today, we are none of them. Not only in Malaysia, even the Western man today doesn't have anything of them. Of course, only that, the last factor, all right? But my point to you, it's not wrong, Islam. The world is facing a major crisis. Many of you may have read this book. which you all do not read. This is the book that has been discussed today in Davos. The Fourth Industrial Revolution. How many of you read the papers today? They ask, Facebook, Instagram, be for one, you are going to be done. Can you imagine what is being said in Davos today and what this book is telling us? The digital age today is no longer a problem with Islam. It's a problem of place of Islam with science, which another book talks about, causality. How man discover, that's why I said to your August panel, we should say what is wrong with the world today. That's more fair. Because the rise of China, the rise of India, is giving the rise of emerging civilization of yesterday. I can bet to you my Malaysian friends or Chinese doesn't even know their China and Confucianism. They're just as bad as the modern Muslim, forgetting their religion. Let's be frank, because you can ask them, do they know? They don't have it. So I think for the West, for the East, it's not a question of Islam, because Islam is not a Malay heritage. It is a universal message. Therefore, the place of revelation, I do respect to the Farouk, revelation and wisdom is what it's all about. Every man must discover his truth as an entity of the creation. And 2 days ago, there's in the Straits Times, page 24, evolution fails to deny creator. This is about recent, Dr. Farid, this gentleman is a friend, I think, Harun Yahya, all of you know. He mentioned, they try to dismiss, the place of creator in science, or even with the latest DNA, and he said, no, there is a place of creation in any of the sciences, even today. So you cannot say today, Islam denies rationalism and scientific inquiry. The modern scientists deny the place of creation by the creator. That is the major contention for many of us who have not had that path. So I would plead to this panel today, if Malaysia were too late, they must go back and build the great Andalusia. How many of you visited Andalusia? How many of you? Put up your hand. Have you done? One. Who else? None. Please go and visit, then we can talk. Because I was there for 1 week, and that is the testimony of the greatness of Andalusia in action. It's still there. It's still there to visit. The whole science is on the wall. The whole Quranic is on the wall. And we don't have that even in Malaysia. So I came here with the message that we need to read the past, learn the future, but the perennial message of truth, of science, intellectual and spiritualism must be there. A modern man, devoid of spiritualism, whatever religion, devoid of intelligence and good conduct, cannot rule the world, his family, his community, or his organization. Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum, good afternoon. My name is Nur Huda. So, the history repeats itself. We used to have medieval dark ages, and now it's our turn. So, looking at the past, when, how they bring out the dark age to the time after that, they bring in the advancement of science. So how about we follow suit? Because it's proven.
Can you repeat again?
The advancement of science.
Advanced science.
Yes. So we just follow suit. We don't need to think about going back to the Salafis or the real or the true Salafis, because there's no proof. There's no proof. It's not proven. And how guaranteed are we that we are not going back to another era of dark age? Because it starts by that true Salafis in any way after the modernization. Okay. So that's all my question. Thank you.
My name is Maitri. I came here with an open mind, not so much for Islam, but for what's wrong with the Malay Muslim society. Yeah, but I also come because I have faith in IRF, that these doctors here are able to diagnose the sickness and find a cure for it. But then, if we go into the branches of Islam, you know, the mutations, I would call it, can we really solve the problem? unless we reverse the process and go back to see that considering Islam is an offshoot of Judeo-Christianity, so to look at the whole tree, and instead of focusing just on a particular part of the tree, then to get a holistic solution. Thank you.
I have no idea how to start. I'm not going to claim innocence here. I'm merely going to say that I was given a prompt by my person on my left here. It was a very problematic prompt, which I would have never picked. Maybe all of you are here to find out what is wrong with Islam. As far as I'm concerned, there is nothing wrong with Islam. I mean, one could say historically, Islam has never been, or put it this way, Muslim peoples have never been as well educated, have never been as well paid, have never been as expansive as they are right now. I mean, at no other point in time in history. Islam is a very, very successful tradition. Muslims are very, very successful. They're contributing to all walks of life. So on one level, there is nothing wrong with Islam. Now, are there problematic issues within the Ummah as Muslims see it? Yes, there are no doubt those things, and these are really self-assessments of essentially trying to, which I find problematic to a certain extent, trying to almost get all Muslims on the same page. I don't think that's a healthy thing. I think diversity of Muslims, diversity of thought, diversity of differences in understanding that Muslims have of what it means to be Muslim would be the healthiest thing. And the problem only comes in when Muslims themselves are trying to narrow something down to a one-size-fits-all. And then you get into problems no matter what it is. As far as whether it's what is wrong with the globe right now or what's wrong with the world, believe me, I've been doing nothing during the past year, ever since somebody took office in the US, trying to sort out what's wrong with the world. So yes, I completely agree with you. There's lots of things wrong, but I don't know. I wish I could give you the one-size-fits-all answer, but to be honest, there isn't one. There isn't just an answer like that. It doesn't happen that way. But whatever problems Malaysians are experiencing, and I say Malaysians, not Malays, but Malaysians are experiencing here, it's your problem. It's not the West's problem, it's your problem. And the problems in the US, believe me, they're my problem and they're my fellow Americans' problems. I hope they don't spill over into other places, but unfortunately America has a problem with spilling over into other places. I wish I could avoid that spillover. I have problems with my own leadership. So,
I think there were a few issues raised just now. Regarding what Dr. Ghazali was saying, I don't think that we have any disagreement with you. We are talking about what is wrong with Muslims, and clearly there are things wrong with Muslims. There are also things wrong with the world. There are problems with Western civilization, with modern civilization. I myself have discussed this in other places. And some of those problems, some of those things wrong with modern civilization, we have inherited. For example, you could say since the decline of Andalusia, since the 15th, 16th century, with the spread of capitalism, colonialism is part of the whole spread of capitalism. Part of the logic of capitalism was racism, right? Racism has something to do with slavery. Slavery was a very important component in the development of capitalism, in the early days of capitalism. And racism was important also in justifying colonial ideology in this part of the world. And we have inherited that. The very idea in Malaysia, this categorization of races, the MCIO scheme, right? Malays, Chinese, Indian, others. This comes from the colonial period. It was a little bit more elaborate in the colonial period because Malays themselves were divided into different groups. But the idea of having rigid racial categories and administering society according to rigid racial categories is a colonial idea, and we've inherited it. So I think it's important that we understand both our own problems that we have created for ourselves, as well as problems that we have inherited, that we have imbibed, you know, from other civilizations. Now, regarding the question from the lady about how to advance science, you see, we are the biggest hypocrites, all right? I'm talking about specifically about Malaysia, but it's true, the same thing is true in other Muslim countries. We have no business to talk about science and knowledge in general when we cannot even run our universities and schools properly. Our universities, I mean, we are a relatively high income country, right? I mean, you know, in terms of the developing world, and we are supposed to be achieving developed status very soon. But our universities are third world universities with poor facilities, bogged down by politics, and cheating. Cheating. I mean, I have heard of, and anyone who works in a university knows of cases of plagiarism committed by lecturers. Anybody who's a graduate student in the university, in humanities, arts and social sciences, will have the experience of being forced to put the name of your supervisor or professor as an author, even though the supervisor or professor did not do any work in the writing of those articles. This is academic dishonesty. It's unethical. It's not done in the developed world. It's not done in, it is the practice in engineering and sciences because they have a different way of doing things, but not in the social sciences. We have all these problems in our universities, not to mention the politics, not to mention the lack of funding, not to mention the poor state of libraries. How can you talk about developing science? How can you talk about developing an intellectual culture? So we need to set those things right, you know, and then you can, you know, and have a proper scheme of service in the universities, have good facilities, allow the professors, the lecturers to do their work, allow for, and we have this, I mean, allow for the development of an academic culture. We also have clocking in, right? How can you run a university like a factory where you have to clock in? So we can't talk about developing science and developing knowledge when we don't even have the basic, you know, we don't even have the basics that you need to run a proper university. Universities in Islamic history were autonomous organizations. They were never under the government. They were never under the state. They were never under the rulers. The universities were formed on the basis of waqaf. All the famous universities that we have heard of, Al-Azhar, the Zaytuna in Tunis, Qairawan, all these famous universities were built on the basis of waqaf, were independent. What today we would call private sector, or even more accurate would be to call them something like NGOs, right? It is in Europe that the universities were under the church. Medieval European universities were under the church, and the church could dictate what is taught and what is not taught. So the church, for example, would sometimes ban certain teachings. The church would say the universities cannot teach the writings of Plato or Aristotle. But this didn't happen in the Muslim universities because there was no state control of the universities. But gradually, in the early modern period, Muslim dynasties, like the Ottomans, the Safavids in Iran, they followed the European model. They established Ministry of Education. Then the ministry would control the universities. And now we have inherited that. Now our universities are all controlled by the state. And the universities, it was said recently, I think one of the universities in Malaysia said that professors, lecturers, students are not allowed to criticize the government. Isn't that right? This happened in one of the universities, am I right? That's incredible. How can that happen? So we have very serious basic problems with our universities which we need to fix in order that we can talk about scientific progress. Yeah, thank you.
So I think I'm in much agreement with my fellow panelists, yeah? But I try to pick up something from Dr. Ghazali, and I think Mr. Nurul Huda and Mr. Matthew, yeah. I think to begin with, Islam is always cosmopolitan religion. Yeah? It's a civilizational religion. That's why if you look into our history, Baghdad is very cosmopolitan, then Istanbul. So nothing less than this cosmopolitan mentality can develop Islam. If you talk about Najat and Riyadh, then definitely not the place. If the birth of Salafism is there, then we know what kind of Islam we have in our time. So that's one thing. And because of this cosmopolitan mindset, and civilizational mindset, where people like Thomas Aquinas, Maimonides, within the Islamic civilization, if you look into their history, their work, they're very much kind of interdependent between the Christian, Aquinas work and Maimonides work with the Islamic intellectual tradition. And even with our faith, our Aqidah or Iman, if we look into the work from Ash'ari, even Sanusi, which is very, very essential in our Malay world, and to Sanusi 16th century, and up to Bajuri, very early 20th century before Abdul, in the very belief of Islam, the Aqidah is embedded this Aristotelian logic, a kind of analytic and logical understanding of faith, verification of faith is already embedded there. But this kind of mindset is no longer there in the Salafi kind of inspired understanding of Islam. So I think if the Muslims are aware that we are very sophisticated and very complex religion, then we need some certain rational and systematic understanding, so it shouldn't be any problem. For example, in the past, even up to the recent time, Muslim usually has kind of three major components in their religion. This is based on our famous hadith, we call Jibril hadith. There is Iman part, which is Aqidah, the faith. We have very complex Ash'ari and Maturidiyah system. Yeah? And we have also the fiqh, the jurisprudence, we have four mazhab thing. And we also have ihsan, this tasawwuf thing. So in Malaysia, for example, in this part of the world, we have Ash'ari as our faith, and Shafi'i is our jurisprudence, and Ghazali very influential our spiritual understanding. It's a very, very complicated kind of understanding of Islam. Yeah, very sophisticated. But when we reduce this understanding into just one line, hadith or Hanbali, which is promoted by Salafi, then you very, very, very reduced kind of Islam. And because of this very reductionist view of Islam, then we have all kind of narrow-minded in our society. So my view is that we should bring back this kind of sophistication, yeah, of understanding Islam. And I also very much indebted to Professor Farid talking about Orientalism just now. Yeah, he talked much about Orientalism mindset in the Malay study, but also very much in the Islamic study. So if the Muslim modernists, yeah, are very enchanted by the Orientalist view of Islam through, for example, Anawati, Gade, or Van S, or what, then they see Islam are very reduced kind of thing. That's why they despise our rich tradition of whether in faith or in jurisprudence or in tasawwuf. So I think we need to kind of address the issue of Orientalism in our Islamic study. Then we can become more convinced or more proud of our own legacy, and to slowly take away this kind of dark ages of the Islamic history post al-Ghazali, for example, which I think Dr. Farouk may think so. But I think for us to have rational thinking, to have analytical thinking, doesn't mean we have to become Mu'tazila, in my thinking. You can become very analytical, very rational, if you look into the tradition of even Ash'ari. So that I think basically my comment. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Syed. Thank you to the panelists for a very interesting discussion. I would agree. The question is not so much what is wrong with Islam. It's more of what's wrong with Muslims nowadays. And if I may just give my own perspective, I think I tend to agree most with Prof. Syed Farid Alatas on his view. Prof did have some averments towards authoritarianism and stifling of speech. But I think the problem is a bigger one. The bigger problem is the mixing of religion with politics. And I'm very careful to say mixing of religion with politics and not Islam with politics. If I may give an example. Just now, Dr. Farouk raised the question, why is it people don't question the matan? They only question the sanad. I would like to draw from that example. It's easy to say why no one questions the sanad, but if you look at, the matan, it's very easy to know why. Because if I were to question the matan, that, in my opinion, opens the Pandora's box. Because to question whether or not the Prophet did or did not make that statement, it is then to go back to question the credibility of the Prophet. And that, to many people, you cannot do. And that is why when you mix religion with politics, you are adding some form of immunity to a certain topic, such that it becomes untouchable. The best example I can give is the very recent Bin Abdullah case in Malaysia. The issue in that case was simple. Section 13 of the Births and Registration Act says that if a father agrees that an illegitimate child's name can be put to his father's name, meaning someone boleh dibinkan to his father, provided that the mother agrees, Section 13 says you can do it. But then there is a fatwa or a series of fatwas which say that an illegitimate Muslim child cannot be binned to his father's name. The Court of Appeal followed the basic civil law and said that that fatwa is not binding and the child can be binkan to his father's name. And then you have the Muslim authorities coming in and saying that that's wrong or that shouldn't be the case. And if we were to challenge the Muslim authorities, they will bring in a lot of Islamic ideas and a lot of Muslim authorities to support their position. And in that situation, you can't challenge them anymore because that is already going into the realm of religion. So the moment you mix religion with politics, it's already a zero-sum game. You can't fight them anymore. And that is why I believe that the problem with Muslims, or Muslims in Malaysia, is that there's too much of religion in the mix. If we look at the most basic level, the schools. Pendidikan Islam is a compulsory subject in schools. And it is tested in SPM as an exam. And it is state-run exam which is telling you the specific form of Islam or religion that they want you to abide by. And if you believe in a different kind or if you take a different view, that itself is already a no-no. I sat in Pendidikan Islam classes. I think it's segregatory, if that is the word, where you separate non-Muslim students and Muslims in two different classes. And you have the state-paid ustad telling you that McDonald's should be banned and such ideas in state-run schools. And I think from the very get-go, that is already a suppression or oppression on Muslims that you cannot think in a certain way or you should think in some other way. And so when you bubble it up from that small level to the higher levels, that tells you that you should think in a certain way or you should not think certain other things. And that is using religion as a basis of a lock. It's like a claw on you telling you that there are certain things that you should not discuss. And there was an interesting study done, I think a long time ago, being about 4 or 5 years ago, on the kinds of books sold in MPH and Popular Bookstore. And if you look at the English section, the variety of books sold there is quite interesting. But when you look at the Malay section, you realize that there's only a certain set type of books sold there, and certain number of books are top sellers. All other kinds of books, I can name certain controversial kinds, are banned. So that again is state sanction on what is to be read and what is not to be read. So if we can remove religion from the discussion, then I believe that everything itself everything will sort itself out. So you wouldn't really have a problem of Salafi or non-Salafi or Wahhabi or non-Wahhabi, or what sect is right, what sect is wrong, because none of that plays in the realm anymore. You don't have to have a discussion of whether this interpretation or that interpretation is right, because in the end everything is discussed secularly. If I can just wrap up, I can give an example. In the US, for example, the commonly asked question of a president-elect or president-to-be is, do you support abortion? Do you support gay marriages? Or something of that sort. And you will have arguments in favor and arguments against. These arguments are usually based on reason. Going back to what Dr. Farouk always says. One person says that morally it's wrong, another person may say that morally it may be wrong, but there are other reasons that support it. But the moment you bring religion into the mix, then you are forced to abide by a higher authority. And you can't question it anymore. Then the question becomes, which religious interpretation is the right one? Is it this one or that one? And then we fall into that trap that we should adopt a Shari view or a Mutazila view or whatever other view there is. But at the end of the day, the question is whether abortion is right or not. And for that, you don't really need to take a religionist view as long as you can use logic. So people should be free to abide by any religion that they believe in, but that religion should not play in the discussion in the first place, because then you're actually ending up playing a zero-sum game. That's just my view.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I just want to say about...
Your name first, yes? Introduce yourself first. Introduce yourself first.
My name is Dr. Abu Asmara. With regards to the topic, I think there's nothing wrong with Islam. As what the panel have said, it is the Muslim. The Muslims are the people who made it wrong or right. So I want to raise just consensus among the speakers, because from what Dato Farouk and Dr. Amran have mentioned, it is the glory, to bring back the glory of Islam, of the Muslim. When we talk about Dark Ages and in the Industrial Revolution, Ottoman Empire and all that. Now I suppose that is the main thing now. Muslim now is down. So from what I understand from the speakers, there are 3 or 4 things which they have raised as the main cause of this down Muslim. Number 1 is what Dr. Farouk have mentioned just now regarding faulty hadith, which says you have to drink camel urine and so on. Number 2, raised by Professor Jeffrey, is regarding Wahhabi, Salafi. Salafi is the influence of Salafi is now coming into the Muslim world, into the Islamic world. And finally, Professor Syed have mentioned is totalitarian. Maybe it happened in Malaysia, it can happen to other countries also. Now, do we agree these are the basic consensus which is related to the downfall of Islam, or Muslim, not Islam? Because Islam, as far as we are concerned, in the sight of God, the principle, the religion in the sight of God is Islam, or submission to God, submission to the one God. I think also this has been taught by Musa, even Isa. It is not. You must remember that Islam is not the religion of Muhammad. It's a religion right from before, which is a submission to God. So I suppose Islam is okay. The only thing is what the consensus has been agreed by the speakers just now, or maybe any other additional factor that caused the downfall of Muslim. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. I was very impressed by Dr. Ghazali's eloquence. I was then reminded when he spoke about Harun Yahya and evolution theory. I was then reminded that, for one, to agree with Harun Yahya in an intellectual way, one should be able to understand, to appreciate what evolution theory is first, right? But that is not a question that everyone here can do. I mean, perhaps everyone here can do, because you can read English, and Charles Darwin's masterpiece, The Origin of Species, is legally available in English, but not the Indonesian one. So if you can only read Malay or Indonesian, you will not be able to understand evolution theory for you to appreciate Harun Yahya's argument. And the interesting part is this. I'm not questioning why that the Indonesian, I'm not questioning why that this evolution theory is seen as a threat. My question is really why the ban is only on the Malay or the Indonesian version, the version that would be comprehensible for majority of Malaysians. And this is the Home Ministry parliamentary answer. It explained the book is banned because it endangers public harmony. Say that the translated book depicts a view of the origin and creation of species that goes against Islamic teachings and is in contravention of the Islamic material censorship guidelines as well as the beliefs of the Ahli Sunnah wal Jama'ah. What I do not understand is, from the Home Minister explanation, you would assume that, say, now if Muslims are exposed to this idea, they probably get confused, therefore things become disharmonious, right? What I do not understand is why only Malay-speaking Muslims would get confused, but English-speaking Muslims would not get confused. And if the idea of evolution theory is so threatening, why was not a fatwa be issued? Why do we actually need the Home Ministry and not Jakim, or the Majlis Agama issue a fatwa and say, now the idea should be banned. And all Muslim doctors, maybe too late for you, Dr. Farouk, but all the new doctors, Muslim doctors, should not be exposed to such idea. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Fu. Actually, I wanted to come for this forum, and I've come for many of the IRF forums. And I thought this was a very interesting topic to discuss. So what is wrong with Islam now? And I posted in Facebook comments where after Farouk posted this forum up. And I said, I wish the panel contributors and the people will really be intellectually honest to really address this issue. And I said, but I suspect no one will attempt it. And looks like it seems to be the case. Now, I'm not here to say whether there's something wrong with Islam, or there's nothing wrong with Islam, or there's a little bit wrong in Islam, or everything is wrong in Islam. I'm not here because I don't have a basis to say that. The reason why I came here was because I wanted to see the discussions by the different people where they put up and say, this is what I think, probably something is wrong or right. Now, it is easy, for the Muslims, I think it is virtually impossible to say there is something wrong with Islam, because immediately you will not be a Muslim. So, obviously that is not going to be something that they will say. But I, as a non-Muslim, can ask that question, is there something wrong with Islam? As an intellectual question. So now, when I look at what's happening, if you say there's nothing wrong with Islam, whether it's something wrong or nothing wrong, but let's say if you say there's nothing wrong with Islam, but then many of the Muslims are saying, yeah, but we see a lot of issues from the outcome of Islam, which is the Muslims and the practices and the violence and all that kind of thing. Of course, there are many good things, but are you saying with all these things, and I think some of the people here say, yeah, there's something wrong with maybe Muslim or the way they are taught or whatever. Now, to me, it becomes very strange that if you claim that the unerrant word of God, can result in errors in outcome, that is very strange. Right? The unerrant, perfect word of God can result in some error in the outcome. So I was hoping that there was a discussion, and I think Dr. Farouk basically propounded one of his reasons, which I thought, that was one way. Professor Kenney was walking on eggshells, so I can understand that. And some of the others basically revert to that there's no such thing as dark ages and you cannot say this kind of stuff. But unfortunately, I do not see any good reasons and discussions about when you talk about Islam, it's not a matter of Muslims. My point when you say Islam is the Islamic text. Is there something wrong with the Islamic text, not just about the Muslims? Okay, so a lot of people conflate the two issues. Now, I think the question basically I'm trying to say is that if you're talking about perfect religion, okay, which many of all the Muslims believe, then we were talking about Islam allows dissension, difference of opinion. Okay, I think I heard that from some of the speakers here. Yeah, in Islam, you should not ban dissension in opinions. Fine. If that's the case, why is it that people who dissent a particular religion, in this case Islam, and want to leave the religion, okay, and want to speak up and say, this is the reason why I don't believe. Why are they being criminalized and being hunted? Is this Islam? That's my question.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Umair and I'm a student, still an undergraduate student. And I'm sorry if my English is bad. I'll try my best. But there are several things. There are two things that I wanted to comment on and many things that I wanted to praise. I mean, I'm in agreement with, which is that what Dr. Farid have argued, that we need to have a healthier discourse. We need to promote this kind of cultural discourse, academic discourse. And Professor Professor Kenney, sorry, Professor Kenney have postulated that what type of Salafis we need to define it first, and I agree with that. What he tried to present, that we need to define first what type of Salafis we are referring to, and there are many more that I've gained much, and but there are also things that I want to comment on. Firstly, it seems to me that this discourse tends to postulate it or argue that Salafism is basically wrong, right? So that's, even though explicitly or implicitly, but it is going towards that all the presenter want to show that somehow Salafism is a problem to Muslim or Islam, either way. And secondly, regarding the problem with Islam, like the questioner asked about the text itself. I think Dr. Farouk have already mentioned about the problem of hadith. I mean Islamic epistemology, right? How do we verify the authenticity of the text of the hadith? Is it really from the Prophet, or is it have been fabricated? Okay, so first one is because regarding the Salafi. I think the problem, if we were to ask the problem, what is the question? We want to answer the question is what is wrong with Muslim now, and the claim that there is no problem with Islam. We need to first define what are the true Muslim, which is in line with the Islam, because there is no problem with Islam. So Islam is not something. It is a ideology. I mean, it is a worldview, right? It is a worldview. So it must be propagated. I mean, it must be brought by someone. So I think we must first define what are the true Muslims first, so that we could And for me, the best example is our first predecessor, which we call the Salaf. And I think if it is plausible to define Salaf as those who try their best to understand Islam according to what have been shown by their predecessor, that is the notably known the 3 generation of Islam. And secondly, about the problem of hadith, Dr. Farouk gave example like of the fly wings. I think firstly we need to know that Islam, the Islamic Sharia, Islamic law, they try to preserve 5 things, right? They have the Maqasid Sharia, Masalih al-Mursalah, whatever decision that is in Islamic jurisprudence, try to preserve these 5 things. And I think I don't think I need to mention all of the 5 things, but the thing is, if a certain hadith are against this the preservation of this Maqasid Sharia, then it doesn't mean that if it's a mustahab hadith, I mean, like the fly, it is not darurat. We don't need to necessarily drink the water, right? But so it doesn't mean that the hadith itself was false because the matan seems to illogical for us. And secondly, we need to know that scientific findings could have a paradigm shift, a radical paradigm shift. We mean that science changed, right? This is in the epistemological concept of science, they are changing. So if a hadith seems illogical to us, I mean the matan, the text seems like contradictory with our what we perceive, with our limited observation, it doesn't mean that it does not really came from the Prophet. And I think, and thirdly, the preservation of hadith by the so-called Salaf, such as Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, if we were to regard him as those who follow the doctrine of Salaf, he practiced the critics of sanad, narration, and the critics of matan also. And there are also a lot of scholars practice this thing, that even though they were labeled as Salaf. And that's all. And I hope if you have any comment on, any response on my contention, please. Okay.
Thank you to all speakers. Okay, I'm Ihsan from IRF. So I want to start with from when we started publicizing about this forum, what is wrong with Islam now. One of the most common response back, which we've already received even before any of the scholars came up with any opinion, that there's nothing wrong with Islam, and there's only thing wrong with Muslims. And I would sense that even with our discussion today, there is more or less the kind of agreement on that statement, that there's nothing wrong with Islam, there's only thing wrong with Muslims. For me, personally at least, I would see there's something wrong with this statement. Why? Why is it? It's not about anything, it's not about whether there's anything wrong about Islam or with Muslims, but we create a clear distinction between what is Islam and what is being Muslim. So that we try to understand Islam such as it is a fully metaphysical concept. We separate it with the reality of the believers, of the people, mainly of we ourselves. By creating this separation, mainly it makes us like not so much as following the strong ideals or the belief of what is being a Muslim is all about. While at the same time, we also create that distinction that the Islam that we understand or what we believe is fully not being affected by the way we understand, or how do we, or mainly the tradition of Muslims over the past so many years, construct how do we understand Islam now. We are putting it totally away from the history and the tradition of the Muslim people. For me personally, that is there's a problem there, which if we don't in any way try to address this situation, we will just make the situation of the ideal of Islam even further and further away from the practical reality of Muslims, even way until the future. Pointing this out, I think that's referring to the opinion of Muhammad Iqbal as an example, which he created that, which one of his critiques is when we try to see Islam as something fully metaphysical, or meaning to say, try to practice Islam just as a metaphysical concept, because the effect of it, we will have difficulties in fully living the ideals and the spirit, mainly of Islam, which is totally, I would say, different to the first earlier generations of Muslims. So based on that point of view or argument, I would like to have some comments from the speakers, mainly on that clear distinction. And one final comment to perhaps the suggestion from the Dato from the Islamic Development Bank. For me, I had the opportunity to go to Andalusia, to Granada, at least last 2 years, but it took half of my personal saving of working 5 years. What I would suggest in the future, perhaps IRF, maybe Islamic Development Bank, or perhaps other organizations could like work on some arrangements together. Maybe we all here can arrange a study trip to Andalusia. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I thought the entire point of the discussion that Professor Alatas was making was trying to make a distinction between the abstract, the ideal, which I would assume Muslims are attempting in their own everyday lives to match up with. Whether it really does match up, one never knows, but of course everyone makes a claim on this. And that's what they're supposed to do. But I think it is a healthy distinction to make, because otherwise, intellectually it's a healthy distinction, because otherwise you might actually think that, guess what, yours is the right one and everyone else is wrong. There's been a couple references by questioners about talking about the Islamic worldview. There is not one Islamic worldview. There are multiple Islamic worldviews. Take your pick. And you know what? That's great. It is a complex and, yes, contradictory mess. Just like every other religious tradition. Just like, by the way, every other political tradition. It's complex and it's contradictory. And one self-selects, cherry picks aspects of it that you want to create your own version of it. In that kind of context, you're bound to have conflict. And you know what? This goes back to the point that Concorde was making in his question. The notion of trying to create social harmony in those kinds of contexts, I think, is completely foolish. The only way to create social harmony is to try to iron out difference and to try to suppress difference. You shouldn't be suppressing difference, you should be encouraging difference. You should be encouraging a context, a public context, where the variety of Islamic worldviews are allowed to exist, as long as they are not, what, physically harmful, because ideas shouldn't be able to harm you if you can think your own ideas. So, in my view, this whole notion of trying to create social harmony is really trying to eliminate difference, not with other religions, but within the Muslim tradition. They're trying to eliminate your thinking about what it means to be Muslim. And that's a very dangerous thing. And that's a political act that, as I think Dr. Alatas was saying, you have the right to change, you have the right to challenge, and whether you need to, and this is the contradictory part, do that at the ballot box. I won't go there right now. That's perhaps an entirely different forum. But with regard to the first question that was asked, and that had to do with the fact that questions about, for example, in the United States, questions about abortion or gay rights are asked, and they're not religious questions. They're some kind of intellectual questions or questions about morality. I'm sorry, I beg to differ. Those are backdoor ways of getting at the religiosity of the candidate. The U.S. has its own religious politics. It's a different format than happens here, but we have our own version of it. So when you're asking a presidential candidate, his or her view about abortion or gay rights, you're trying to get out what their moral basis is for whatever their view is, and that is trying to get at religion in a context in which people are really supposed to be civic and secular, but guess what? They're not.
Thank you very much for the question. I just want to make a small comment. I think Dr. Wong talk about this evolution. First place, I don't agree with banning book. Yeah, we don't. By this time, we shouldn't. The issue of banning book shouldn't be the case in the globalized world. And yeah, and I think and we also, me myself, don't disagree with Harun Yahya's interpretation of evolution. And we should, in fact, as Muslims, we need to respond or to give our own counter kind of argument against this issue. And I think nowadays Muslims should have a good response to this evolutionary kind of ideas, because we know biology now is very important field in the modern science. So that's just a small comment. And I think Islam is both, it's theory and also praxis. So there's always a kind of dynamic between text and context, and we shouldn't kind of idealize the situation, because what we said about metaphysics, about our construction also. So I think there's always a dynamic between text and context, and throughout the time kind of not really development, a kind of enrichment of kind of cumulative understanding of Islam through the ages. Yeah? That's why I think where one of our brothers talk about doctrine of Salafi. I think the problem with Salafi, because their purist approach, they tend to distinguish between the so-called contextual kind of flowering of Islam. And when you start track into the matan and text argument, then you're track into the purist lingo, see? So anything when I think in the past, I do not know, maybe Prof. Farid can verify, there's not so much discussion about the status of hadith kind of people. A kind of Muslim taken for granted, but they know the things, the status of matan and sanad, but they don't make it as a past that we see now. This, I think, the influence of this the Salafi thinking, that going back to the text very, very strongly. I think, and we know very much that even the word Salafi, I said, the recent phenomena, people in the past didn't attribute themselves Salafi. In the past, Muslims really, if they said one person, a certain scholar, they will say whether they are al-Ash'ari or al-Shafi'i, they never claim they say al-Salafi. You never find any of the scholars in the past say they are Salafi. In the past, there is, this very modern phenomenon. In the past, instead they use the word Salafi. First, they refer to Ashabul Salam. That means the pious predecessor, but not to individual. And also they call Mazhab as-Salaf in the matter of faith. So the Salaf or Salafi word are very kind of, they put in certain time frame, the 300 years maybe the beginning. But after that, the Muslim didn't claim they are Salafi anymore. You see, only in 20th century the people call themselves Salafi. So it is a very constructed view of Islam, which try to, I said, back project to the kind of idealist time. I think that's my
I would like to respond to some of the questions and comments. First of all, there was a question about, there was an issue raised about mixing religion and politics. Now, I'm not of the view that the problem is mixing religion and politics per se. I think the problem is when the kind of religion, the understanding of religion is an absolutist religious thinking is absolutist in terms of its orientation, and it's authoritarian in its orientation. That is the problem. But there are non-religious ideologies that are also absolutist and that are also authoritarian. Those would also be problem. So it's not religion per se. I can think of where religion, bringing religion into politics would actually be better for us. For example, I would want to bring those aspects of Islamic jurisprudence which do not allow banning of books. I will use that argument against our secular government. Secular governments ban books. I can use religion to make an argument for freedom. So it's not religion per se. Now, you know, Eric Fromm, the psychologist, made a distinction between humanistic religion and authoritarian religion. In all religions, you have a humanistic tradition and an authoritarian tradition. When we say we are against religion, mixing religion and politics, actually we are referring to bringing in the authoritarian tradition in religion and bringing that into politics. That's what we're really against. So I think we need to make these distinctions. It's not religion per se that is the problem. Chinwat raised the issue of why is it, that's a mischievous question also, because you know the reason, I think. So why do they ban books written in Malay? They tend to ban books written in Malay, but although there have been some books in English also banned, the G25 book was banned, that's in English. I have an article in there about the Amman message, and the book is banned because it's, I don't know what the stated reason is, prejudicial to national security or something like that, I don't know. Now, obviously the reason why they tend to ban books written in Malay is because they are afraid of the influence of these books on the Malay masses, the majority of whom are more conversant in Malay than in English. But I foresee a situation in the near future where more and more English books will be banned, because to the extent that more people are reading English, and that these ideas they think will pose a threat. But I think for the time being, it's the old feudalistic, here you also see the workings of a feudalistic mentality. The feudal mind, rather than argue and debate and have discourse with, between the rulers and the subjects, rather than do that, they would rather just marginalize the ideas and shut out the ideas completely. This is the mentality. The whole idea is actually against the interests of the rulers themselves. Because in this day and age, there's no way you can prevent ideas from circulating. So it will not work. It will only be detrimental to the rulers themselves, because at some point they will become obsolete. Their ideas will become obsolete. Gentleman, I think Mr. Matthew, is it? Your name is Matthew? Who was that? Someone? Oh no, not Matthew, it was another gentleman. Huh? Yeah, Robert Poe, yeah. That you say the word of God, it's strange to you that the word of God could result in erroneous understandings by people. I think it has to be that way. If the word of God would be understood perfectly by people, there's no point in being human beings. There's no point to creation. The whole point is that we will have diversities in interpretations, we will have erroneous interpretations, we have correct interpretations, or we will have diversity, even if they're all correct. So that, as Syed Nursi once said, the Ottoman thinker Syed Nursi, said, so that we could distinguish between coal and gold. No, what is it that's produced in the coal? Coal and diamonds, right? If everything were to be diamonds, how could we appreciate a diamond? The only reason that we can appreciate a diamond is because there is coal. If everybody were to have perfect knowledge of everything, what distinguishes from God? And what distinguishes us from each other? How could we appreciate the truth? How could we appreciate the understanding of reality if everybody has the perfect truth? There is no purpose to creation in that sense, if that were to be the case. So, to me, it is a blessing that we have the Word of God and that we can attempt to understand it. It makes our cultural and intellectual lives interesting. But the point is, we have to learn to live with the diversity and to accept the diversity. And I think, in this sense, Muslims need to know their history. We need to know our history. We need to know that we have a culture of embracing diversity. If you look at the works of the earlier scholars, you find that there were numerous sects in Islam. You look at the work of Shahrastani, Al-Milal wal-Nihal, the book of sects and nations. You look at the work of Abu Tahir al-Baghdadi, Al-Farq bain al-Firaq, and many other works which talk about different sects and denominations and schools of thought in Islam. There were so many, not just, the 4 Sunni schools. There were many schools, and they were all in existence. They argued with each other. There were polemics between one and another. They argued, but they were existing. There was no banning of groups, and of course there were abuses, like people were put in jail and people were burned or killed. These were political acts, but they were not sanctioned by the jurists. So if we know our tradition and we know our culture, which accepted diversity, this is what we must push for. It is wrong, as the mentality that we have today, at least the mentality of the elite, right, the ruling elite, is to have a homogeneous Islam and exclude everybody who doesn't conform to that homogeneity, and to legislate that by banning groups, by banning individuals, by banning books, and by going into people's homes to see if they are practicing Islam correctly, raiding their homes, confiscating their works. This is not Islamic tradition. This Inquisition kind of culture, actually comes from Christianity. It was practiced by the church. And then in Western civilization, this metamorphosized into the intelligence culture of, interrogation. And then during the colonial period, we inherited that tradition from the West. But this Inquisition culture is, we have some examples in Islamic history, but it's not really part of our culture. So I go back to the earlier point that I made, that really it's up to us to know our history, know our tradition, and use that as a tool to fight against the dominant understanding of Islam and the dominant politics, which is moving in a more and more authoritarian direction. So I think also somebody asked about true Muslim. We should understand who the true Muslim is. I think it's not a matter of being of a true Muslim. We all have our own understanding of what it means to be a true Muslim. We shouldn't really define it and then measure other people according to our definition of true Muslim, because then you get into a dangerous politics. The point is to allow for the diversity, right? And to understand that allowing for diversity is not because we are liberal and we are following liberal interpretations of Islam or westernized interpretations of Islam, but to understand that that is really Islamic tradition. It is our heritage to allow for that diversity. Yeah, I think I've sort of referred to all the issues that. The final point is that, I don't think we are so much interested in, well, in my case anyway, I'm really not interested in reviving the glory of Islam. First of all, the so-called glorious days of Islam are not that glorious. the so-called golden age of Islam, there were things about it which I would like to revive. The tradition of science and learning, the attention given to scholarship, the atmosphere of debate and discussion. I would like to revive that. But there were things about those so-called golden, glorious days or that golden age which we have to understand about and avoid. For example, Harun al-Rashid. You've heard the name, right? The Abbasid Caliph, golden age of Islam. But he was a very, he was a problematic fellow. He had torture chambers. He wasn't that nice a guy. So we don't want to revive that kind of politics. So when you talk about the golden age of Islam, be careful what you mean. The Ottoman period, it was great in so many ways. But the Ottoman sultans were terrible people. You know, the Ottomans had this rule, it was part of their law, that they had to kill their brothers to protect the dynasty. Because when an Ottoman sultan, when he became a sultan, he had brothers, and the brothers would try to get the throne. They would fight among themselves. So at some point, I don't remember exactly when, it was not in the early days of the Ottoman Empire, at some point they made a rule that it was wajib for, it was, what do you call it, obligatory for the sultan to annihilate his brothers so that they could not compete for the throne and destabilize the Ottoman Empire. This was justified. One way they would kill, sometimes a father would kill a son. You know, one way they would do it, they would put poison in the robes, in the thobe, and present the thobe, the robe, as a gift. They would use the robe and they would get the poison and they would die. And the many other ways, sometimes strangulation. They would also kill their own wazirs, their own officials. So there were many things that were terrible about the so-called golden ages or these great empires. The thing is, we need to understand our history, understand the culture, understand the heritage, and then decide what we want to take from that.
Before we close the session, I think I have to answer the guy's question, the student question on Matan and Sanad. I'm sorry, maybe Dr. Amran did not like the word, but I think that's the real problem that we're facing nowadays. Whether we like it or not, we have to face this because the whole issue stems from the way we understand this. And as I've said, that the understanding that once the Sanad is authentic, then the Matan must be authentic is, to me, problematic, right? And if we say that, science will change, but there are certain things in science that are definite. There are theories and there are hypotheses in science that can change, but there are certain things which are definite, okay? For example, Helicobacter pylori that was found to cause peptic ulcer disease, you cannot say that it's caused by Staphylococcus aureus, for example. It has been determined, like it's a fact. It cannot change. So Salmonella typhi cause typhoid disease from the legs of these flies. You cannot change that fact. You cannot say that it's something else. These are the things that, that is going to be fixed there and then. They won't change, but there's certain theory that will change. Theory and hypothesis are different things. The thing I'm trying to say about this is that the most important thing is to understand that in matters that pertaining to life, to our human condition, right? Muamalah, to siyasah, and so on and so forth. Politics, how we govern the state. Economics, right? From the Islamic Development Bank and so on and so forth. These are all worldly matters. And worldly matters requires intellect. It requires us to think what's the best way to solve the problem. It's not based on text. If you say that science can change, well, I say hadith, people, the status of hadith is dhonni. It's not like a Quran, which is qat'i, which is indisputable. but it's Zonni, right? What was assumed to be authentic before by the previous muhaddithin, such as hadith al-ikhtilafu fi ummati rahmatun, the dispute among my followers is a blessing from God, it's rahmat, it's a blessing from God. That hadith was deemed authentic. As-Sayuti and so many other scholars of hadith. But Al-Albani recently, in the 20th century, said it's da'if, it's weak. So how do we say that? How do we say that, anything to do with religion, we must take it, as authentic? It changes as well. So, nothing is definite except the verses in the Quran. So what I'm trying to say is that in the end, the problem that we're facing, or the Muslims are facing nowadays, is to try and solve the worldly issues based on text. Especially when they're not looking at the ethics behind it, but looking at the literal translation of text. I quoted this sirah from Ibn Munzir, right? Ibn Munzir in the Battle of Badr, right? What was stated by Tariq Ramadan in his book, In the Footsteps of the Prophet. But there was another story as well, from Sahih Muslim, for example. It was stated that the people of Medina went to see the Prophet and asked the Prophet whether he allows cross-pollination or not, cross-pollination of the dates. And he forbade them. What happened the next year was that the crops were reduced, right? The yield was reduced. Because the yield was reduced, they went back to the Prophet and they said, you forbid us from doing cross-pollination. And now, see, the yield has reduced. So what did the Prophet say? Antum a'lamu bi umuri dunyakum. You know best of your world. Meaning to say, in this world, we should find solution to our own problem, not by looking at text. The problem is that what is wrong with Islam now, or Muslims now, is because we tend to look for text, especially from the hadith, rather than looking at the essence, the ethics of it. Right? We talk about Islamic banking and so on and so forth. We change the terms, the Arabic terms into mudaraba, musharraka, so on and so on. What we call qardul hasan and so on and so forth. But the principles of it basically is same as the conventional system, the assuring. It has nothing. There is nothing different. We cannot find the difference in between except some terms. How do you call that, right? So we have to look into the ethics of it. Similarly, those people who are promoting Islamic medicine, there's nothing Islamic about Islamic medicine. People ask me to give lectures in the universities, in Malaysian universities. When I went there and I gave lectures about Islamic medicine, and I told them, there's nothing Islamic about Islamic medicine, right? Islamic medicine is actually evidence-based medicine. Medicine must be based on evidence. And that is what modern medicine is all about. It's evidence-based medicine. They did not call me after that. Okay. So I think with this, I would like to thank you, Prof. Jeffrey Kenney and Prof. Farid and Dr. Muhammad Amran. And thank you very much, and inshallah we'll see again, and I'll give back to Isan.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Ahmad Farouk, Professor Jeffrey Kenney, Professor Syed Farid Alatas, and Dr. Amran. I would like to ask for our participants for another round of applause. We had a fantastic and wonderful discussions. Yeah. Of course, before you all leave, we've also prepared a light high tea meal. I'm not sure whether Dr. Farouk planned for such a big number of participants as today. I hope the food will be enough, and there's nothing wrong on that part. So I look forward to meet you all again in our future events and programs. Look forward for further updates from the Islamic Renaissance Front, from our social media platforms, and perhaps some other articles we've been written from time to time. Hope to see you all again, and thank you. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.